You are listening to the Fly the W670 podcast. It's season 3. It's episode 2. Bruce Miles talks the franchise, the Chicago Cubs. Don't forget to listen, download, review. Most importantly, subscribe to the podcast. Follow us on the socials, Fly the W670 on Twitter, Instagram, Fly the W on Facebook, or email us at flythew670@gmail.com. All right, Crawly, we've made it to the first Thursday of the new year. And things still aren't happening much over at Clark and Addison, at least as far as we know.
Right. Hopefully they're working on something. And the funny thing is when this podcast is released on Friday, we are going to officially be 1 week away from Cubs convention. So, obviously Craig Counsell was the big news, but Dustin, that happened way back in the beginning of November. You'd like to see some shiny new toys. Hopefully they'll have something, but we'll see. But hard to believe, CubsCon is really that first step into that 2024 season.
Absolutely right. Now, the one thing we did talk about on the last podcast that the Cubs officially announced the coaching staff, and one of the great news items was that Tommy Hottovy, a regular with the Mully Haugh Show, a friend of the podcast as well, is back, and he was able to join Mully Haugh on Wednesday to talk about the process of going through the job and what it was like, because it was a tumultuous time to say the least.
Yeah, it was really an interesting listen. And every time Tommy comes on the Mully Haugh, it's an interesting listen, but especially with all the changes, I mean, we've all been there, Dustin, where all of a sudden there's a new boss and you kind of don't know you're standing around things. And it definitely is uncomfortable. And he kind of goes through that. In the first clip that we got, Tommy talks about all the changes in the Cubs organization. It just wasn't Craig Counsell. And this is what he had to say so far.
It's been an adventure for sure. I think, there's so many emotions that happen throughout the course of an off season in general, just when you have things staying normal. But when you make changes at manager, and with me and Rossi, we've been together for a long time. I was with him in my old role when he was a player, and you win a World Series together, and you're part of something there, and then you're part of a staff together, on the coaching side, and you get to know guys, you get to know them, their families, and just kind of what makes them tick, and then and then things change, and you don't know kind of the direction of where the organization is going to go in terms of, staffing and who the new manager is going to be and what their values are going to be and what they're going to do. So there's a lot of uncertainty that goes into that. And then, you add the fact that we lose Brez, a very, very talented guy who helped our organization pull forward in a lot of different areas that we wanted to improve on. And he was the head of that. And, now he's gone. So you kind of are left filling the gaps. And the one thing I would say, and this is just what makes this organization so special to me, was there was no sense of panic at any point. There was also no sense of like, well, I don't know, what my status is going to be, so I'm just going to wait. Guys just started working, and they kept plugging along. They're like, okay, well, he's gone. I'm going to do this. I'm going to step up and take this responsibility. Guys up and down the organization on the pitching side just continue to shine and continue to show how good they can be as coordinators and as coaches and stuff. And so organizationally, I don't felt like we missed anything, on the pitching side, especially this off season. And communication's been great with those guys, but it was a roller coaster of an off season from a staffing perspective. And then you add in the fact of, we also have to build the team, during this process as well. And that's been there's been a ton of conversations on that front.
When you think about it, and what Tommy's talking about there, is that probably the two guys that he most directly interacted with it comes down to David Ross being the skipper and Craig Breslow, who was in charge of the pitching infrastructure. So there's a hierarchy. And so, Tommy would have a lot of conversations with Craig Breslow, and, in a matter of a couple of weeks, both of those guys are gone. And that's got to be really jarring.
No, Really, really jarring, really tough period. No doubt about it. You don't know what's up next. You don't know if you're coming. You don't know if you're going. You don't know what the leadership is exactly for a little bit. So yeah, trying time for everybody involved. No doubt about that.
The thing I do like hearing about that though, is that, you know, when Tommy kind of talked about all the guys not just sitting around waiting to see where their place was, it was business as usual, put your head down and work, and however it plays out, it plays out. And I think that talks a lot to the character, not just of Tommy, but a lot of the guys that are on that staff. Obviously Dustin Kelly's the hitting coach, even John Maley. I mean, he basically was announced that he was going to be there. And now you got a new, you don't know how that's going to work. Those guys all just sat there, just kept working, kind of doing what they were supposed to do. And like I said, speaks a lot of the characters of the guys on this staff.
No doubt about it. That it's really good to know that they had to put their best foot forward while things weren't crystal clear. But I'm sure when they left at the end of the year on those exit meetings, there was kind of a plan already set in place for them.
Yeah, definitely. There's always a plan, but when all of a sudden the plan kind of gets turned on its head like it did,
no
okay.
doubt. No, listen, no doubt. Listen, no doubt about it. Everybody's got questions. I don't think anybody, right? Nobody saw that coming.
Nope.
Nobody saw that coming. We didn't see that coming. No way.
No. And so, you know, Tommy was asked about what he's learned so far about new manager Craig Counsell, and this is what he had to say about his new skipper.
He's known and he's getting paid and he's in that role for a reason, because he is so good at what he does. From afar, you see him and you're like, you feel like he's on top of everything, right? He's not missing anything. I didn't know that, you know, I didn't know him kind of going into this process. We met, you know, just briefly, but you're across the way. You're like, man, you're not going to sneak anything by him. I felt like, you know, when you're in the opposing dugout. Now getting to know him and getting to spend some time with him and get to know what kind of makes him tick, he is on top of everything. He is 100% going to be thoughtful about what he does. Even when people ask him questions, it's a very thoughtful answer. You can tell he's thought about it before. There's not going to be many times you're going to ask him something that he's not going to have an answer or have already thought about in his own mind. And I think for a guy who played as long as he did and has now managed for as long and done as well as he has, there isn't a whole lot of things that can get by him. And he talks about some of the managers that he was around that have kind of gotten him, inspired him to get to where he is. He's talked about managing against Joe Madden and things he learned against Joe and things like that. And I think that's what's really cool is he's not afraid to talk about like what he's still trying to learn and what he wants to do. But he's very concise in the things that he knows are going to make our team the best. And those are the type of things that we want to continue to grow on. It's, you come to a new organization, you see all these different things in a different lens. And so it's going to be really good for us to be able to cut out the things that probably helped us in the past, but maybe not obsolete anymore, but maybe there's a better, more efficient way to look at them. And I know Counsell is going to be on top of that.
Yeah, that was some high praise from Tommy, and I agree with him. You know, anytime you got a new, fresh set of eyes, that's going to look good. You know, we talked to Tim Dillard, you know, former pitcher of the Brewers, and he had just great things to say about Craig Counsell and how he helped him individually. There was that story out this year about how the Brewers were picking up the signs from the Cubs, stealing the signs. I mean, I just feel like Craig is just a very detail-oriented guy, and everybody that knows him, those are the type of things that I keep hearing. So I'm excited to see what kind of changes he can make to the Cubs organization. And like Tommy said, what are some things that you can streamline, make more efficient, do better, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And new set of eyes never hurts. It's never a bad thing. And as we talked about in the last episode, Crawly, there's a whole set of new eyes, right, on the pitching front with Breslow exiting town.
Yeah, and new farm director, all sorts of different things that are going on. So it'll be good. Now, Tommy was asked if he ever planned on leaving the Cubs this offseason. Obviously, again, Tommy talked that, hey, you know, he was with the team when David Ross was a player. later on as a coach. Maybe he doesn't know where his spot is on this, what Craig Counsell wants to do. And so this is what he had to say in response to that question.
Like for me making my case to stay, I definitely, had to kind of re-interview for the job, with the new manager and obviously the changing in the front office with Brett leaving and the restructuring of some things that we've kind of announced now. And I obviously loved my time being around Joe Madden. I learned a ton, just about the game and how to treat people and how to do things we felt like the right way. And then being around Rossi in a completely different, atmosphere that he created, in his time here, and just the type of person he is, the motivator, the gravitas that he carries. And I was kind of reflecting back on that time, and I was like, the whole time you get invested in people. And when you talk about the year that Justin Steele had and Albert Azalai and being around Kyle Hendricks for as long as I've been around him, and those relationships, you just keep getting tugged back. And people, I know I'm broken record. I'm talking, to people that understand, but there's not a lot of places like the Cubs and not a lot of places like Chicago, and getting to go, walk out to the bleachers every day to work and interact with the fans and be part of an organization that has so much history and so much culture. It's hard. It's hard to not want to be here, long term. Obviously there's going to be other opportunities and going to be other things. I'm not going to be here forever, as much as I would love to. But for right now, and what we're doing and how things are changing, this is where I wanted to be. And the second part of that was just making sure that I was going to be able to connect well with Counsell and his vision and be able to provide for him what he needs out of a pitching coach to be the best version of himself and do what's best for our organization. So, it's definitely an eventful offseason from that standpoint, but it's also been important for me to be part of the transition and be part of bringing in new people and helping them kind of get their footing in the organization and continue to help our players grow in their careers.
Yeah, having to re-interview for the job, it's always a little bit nerve-wracking. And you think about the guys that he has worked under, whether it is Joe Madden and David Ross, just two completely different kind of managers. Not saying one way is, better than the other, but you kind of learn from that. And I think, he talked a little bit about the continuity as far as, when you talk about Craig Counsell, he may know something about some of the guys, but he doesn't know how they tick, and it's going to be good. And there's a new bench coach in from, that the Cubs got, who's not familiar with everybody. So it's nice to have people that do know the guys and that the guys are comfortable with. And there's a lot of reasons that you want to keep Tommy Hottovy, and he, I'm glad that they did.
Yeah, I'm glad they did too, obviously, for multiple reasons. I think continuity, as you mentioned, Crawly, is a big factor. The other part is, if you did really do a complete flush, if you had gotten rid of everybody and just like, okay, David Ross and his entire staff are exiting stage left, right? All of a sudden, that might set the clock back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because then all of a sudden, Craig Counsell and all his new people have to meet all these new guys, because just because you managed against the Cubs for so many years doesn't mean you know the guys like you know your own team. So I think this will be very good. Now, what we have to keep in mind, we have to worry about, it's human nature, is we have to make sure that everybody respects each other's opinions on this, right? That they understand, like, hey, you got to trust. There's got to be a trust factor, and I guess that's part of why Tommy mentioned that he had a re-interview for the job, if you will, because they have to make sure that they can get along. It's a big deal. They spend a lot of time together.
Right. And he talked about their visions aligning and everything. And, just knowing what I know, Chicago's a special place to work. It was Eric Karros who once said that everybody should play for the Cubs at least one season. And that kind of goes into the managers too. It's just a unique situation where you got day games. If you got a family, you can be home by dinner time and have like a somewhat normal life. When I sit there and I see Tommy, my season tickets are where they are, but every now and then I'll pop into the bleachers, and you got the bleacher bums that are out there. A lot of these guys are going to 50, 60, maybe even 70 games. And they know Tommy, and they Tommy will throw him a ball, whether you're talking about my Thai guy or Bleacher Jeff or Danny Rocket or Lauren Wisdom or Lissa. There's just a whole list of people that are out there constantly, and a good relationship between a lot of, because all those guys are in the left field bullpen, which is underneath the left field bleachers. So they're talking to him every day. It's a completely, you can't find that with pretty much any other team in baseball.
Right.
Now,
right. It's like he said, it's a very unique place to play. It's a unique place to work, and it's a unique place to watch baseball. That's why we all love it so much.
Now, Dustin, we have been waiting for the Cubs to make an offseason move. And Tommy was asked a little bit about what, the responsibility he has when it comes to free agency. And this is how he replied.
My main responsibility or role in some of this procurement, of free agents is a lot of breakdown of the player, obviously, what I think they do well, how we feel like we might be able to help them a little bit, how we may be able to just continue to help them grow their careers, but also like to show them all of the resources, the tech, the processes, the things that we have in place to make sure that they're going to be, like I said, the best version of themselves. We send out, we do a lot of breakdowns. We send out free agent videos to the guys. And then, we will hop on like Zoom's calls or Teams calls. We'll hop on, meetings if we have to go do meetings with the big free agents. But then the rest of that's pretty much out of my hands. I'm more of like show them behind the scenes, talk about the things we want to continue to grow on. Obviously the contract negotiations, that's way over my head. So I'm much more of the, here's what we have, here's the type of stuff we do, here's why we think you would fit here really well, that kind of thing, and try to sell them more on the Cubs and what we're trying to accomplish.
When you talk about what, Tommy, he mentioned two kind of different things there. Number one is that they are obviously going to take his opinion on different free agents. So if it's a Blake Snell or if it's a Yamamoto, whatever, Tommy's going to go in and break down that film and see what those guys do. And is there something that he sees that the Cubs may say, okay, maybe we add a sweeper slider. Maybe we add this to his arsenal. Maybe we move him a little bit to the left of the pitching rubber. Whatever he thinks they can do to make them a better player, that's part of his job. Now, once they start talking to the player, to the free agent, and as obviously clearly on the pitching side, he is the one that would talk to the player about what the Cubs are doing from a pitching standpoint, how they're different, how the Cubs can help that prospective free agent pitcher get to that next level. I remember there was I heard Hottovy that really sold Jameson Taillon on coming to the Cubs. So, sometimes there are pitchers that just say, give me the ball, I'm going to rear back and throw it. And there are other guys, Darvish is one that I thought of, Kyle Hendricks, guys that like to talk about the art of pitching. And when that happens, that's when a guy like Tommy Hottovy can really shine to tell these free agents, this is the kind of equipment we have. This is the technology we're using. Here are some of the things that we're doing, and this is how it can help you.
Yeah, absolutely. Love the honesty from Tommy that, of course, they all have a wish list, right? Everybody's got a wish list, but interesting, right? He's saying what a lot of us also thought. They've got to add to that bullpen. They can't just be relying on 3 or 4 guys every single time out. Also found it interesting that Tommy, I guess, like everybody else, would like another starting pitcher.
Yeah, this is so you and I, we've had lists the entire time. Here are the free agents and here are the trades. But Tommy, like you said, very clear about what he wanted, and this is what he had to say.
Number one, I've got like this wish list. I think we all do of guys that we'd like. And I think the big thing for me, seeing how last year played out, we need to solidify, in my mind, just some bullpen, that middle of the bullpen.
Right.
We can't rely on 3 guys, 4 guys all season long. I know we've got some really, really good young guys coming up and guys that are ready to step up and have worked their tails off this offseason to continue to grow and get better. So being able to piece some pieces together there to help bridge the gap for those young guys, with some veteran presence out there. I really, really like Darren Holmes, our bullpen coach who we just hired. I think he's going to bring a lot of knowledge and wisdom and respect and help a lot of these young guys as they're transitioning, to the major leagues and in that role. I think he's going to do a fantastic job out there with those guys. So, I think solidifying the bullpen for me is always key. We always can't have enough starting pitching. Being able to add another starting pitcher gives you the flexibility to do things with some of those kind of swing guys who you want to start, but also have weapons out of the bullpen. So that could solve some of those issues as well. So on the pitching side, for me, I feel like a starter and 2 bullpen pieces are probably kind of, where my wish list would be. But honestly, like I said, I know how hard these guys have been working this offseason and what they're doing. And I'm excited to get to let them showcase their stuff when they start getting to spring training.
Couple things there, Dustin, is that, again, he didn't say it specifically, but we all know what he wants, which is a front end starter. You need another 1 or 2. I think the Cubs are very fine. If you're telling me Jameson Taillon, who I think is going to take a step forward this year, is your 3, Hendricks is your 4, young guy is a 5. Okay, I'm cool with that. But Justin Steele had a great year, but that was 1 season, Dustin, and now he's going to have to repeat that to show that he is a bona fide ace on this rotation, that he is a front of the line starter. So for me, you do need another front end starter if you have any aspirations of going to the playoffs and getting far. And then clearly we talked a little bit about the bullpen. You had Alzolay, you had Leiter, you had a couple guys, but in general, it was always, how do you get the ball from the starter to the 8th inning pitcher, to Leiter, and then to Alzolay? And there was ups and downs in that all season. And you want to have somebody too with a little bit of experience in that role. So there has to be more depth in the bullpen.
No doubt about it. Got to be more depth. And I appreciate, again, Tommy Hottovy's honesty. Great guy. Glad he's back. Glad he'll be back on with Mully and Haugh, all things being equal. And maybe we'll get him on the Fly the W podcast as well. You are listening to the Fly the W670 podcast. It is season 3. It's episode 2. Bruce Miles talks the franchise, the Chicago Cubs. Don't forget to listen, download, and subscribe to the Fly the W podcast. Leave those 5-star reviews. And in this segment, Crawly talks to Bruce Miles, former Cubs beat writer and co-author of the new book, The Franchise, Chicago Cubs, A Curated History of the North Siders. Bruce shares some of the great stories of his many years on the Cubs beat and some interesting observations with you.
Welcome to another live edition of Fly the W. I am happy to have on longtime Cubs beat writer and a good friend of mine, Bruce Miles. Bruce, how are you doing, buddy?
I am doing great. Good hearing Pat Hughes on a winter's day that tells us that the baseball's not too far away.
No, sir. It is the Cubs convention. What are we talking about? A week from Friday. So we're almost there.
We're almost there. And as you know, it's one of the big, exciting events of the year. Everybody looks forward to it, and everybody's just nuts at that thing.
Yeah, it's now we have all these different shows, podcasting, streaming, all that stuff. And, but back in the day, you were the Cubs beat writer for what? How many years? 30 years?
22 years on the Cubs, and I covered baseball for 31 years overall. So, yeah, a lot of time spent in press boxes and clubhouses, on the field, and so forth.
Right. And so there used to be like nothing before all this stuff started coming out. And now, we're still a little bit crazy, but it's almost like let's get ready to have some fun. You know what Chicago's like in the summertime when baseball's hopping and Wrigley Field's rolling. We just missed that. So I always tell people, like, for me at Cubs convention, it's a chance to see the friends that I don't see during the off season. And these are people that come from all over the place. So it's exciting and plenty of good memories with you guys, with all the beat writers. You guys always knew how to have a good time at CubsCon.
Oh, yeah, and it was always good interacting with guys like you. We knew that you'd be among the first to ask the tough questions there of whoever it was, whether it be Theo or the Epsteins or the manager, whatever it was. Crawly was first in line.
That was, again, it was fun, and you guys were always great. But the reason I wanted to have you on is that you wrote this fantastic book. It's called The Franchise, Chicago Cubs, A Curated History of the North Side. I got my book. I got it autographed by you and Jesse Rogers. And so this is such a great book for Cub fans. obviously you retired. That gave you probably a lot of time, and you just said to yourself, hey, you know what? I got some stories to tell. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that does. The publisher Triumph Books out of Chicago basically let us have free reign in doing whatever we wanted to do, tackling whatever subjects we wanted to tackle. I think I did 8 or 9. Jesse did 4 or 5. We split it up a little bit, but I was able to explore some things that I wanted to get deeper on. I wanted to find out about legacies, how people look back on things. And I also wanted to go back in history a little bit and find out a little bit more about what was going on when I was a kid and even before then. So we were able to run the gamut from Gabby Hartnett right up until the modern day.
Now, I saw that you were at a local library, Schaumburg Library, and I said to myself, well, I'm going to go see Bruce, say hi, and listen to what he has to say about the book. And that's why I wanted to have you on here, because I thought you did such a good job. So, Bruce, if you're, next time you're in a library, let me know and we'll tweet it out. But the presentation was so great. And, while you were there, you kind of let us know that there was what you determined was an off-ramp for Sammy Sosa to potentially reunite with the Cubs. And all of a sudden my little ears perked. I said, what? And you kind of talked about that. Let our listeners know about this off-ramp that you have to reunite the Cubs with Sammy Sosa.
Yeah, well, I put in the book that, for all these many years, the Ricketts family, Tom Ricketts in particular, has been vocal about not having Sammy back. And he's talked around the issue a little bit, the steroids, whatever, maybe walking out on the team. And nowadays, there is a Cubs Hall of Fame. It's been revived the last couple of years. You've seen it the first year that under the new Cubs Hall of Fame, Jose Cardinal and Pat Hughes. And last year, Sean Dunston and Mark Grace. Just a great day. Those guys were thrilled. Well, it came up that, pretty soon Sammy's got to be on this ballot. And it turns out that he is. And what I write in the book is that if Tom doesn't want to do it himself, if Sammy is elected to the Cubs Hall of Fame, well, then there it is. He's got to invite Sammy back, if only to say, Sammy, this independent commission, this committee voted you into the Cubs Hall of Fame. We have to have you back. It gets Tom off the hook. He doesn't have to eat crow or anything like that. An independent committee does or doesn't vote Sammy in. And if they do, he's got to come back. So I think that's the off-ramp. I think it's a win-win for everybody. If indeed Sammy gets in, we don't know if that's going to happen. I think they'll announce that as they did last year at the convention.
Yeah, you got two men with egos, when you talk about Sammy and you talk about Tom Ricketts, and neither of them want to bend, and this is a way to kind of get there. Now, I talked to your fellow person who has a vote, person on the commission. I talked to David Haugh, and I thought in myself, I said, I think that he's going to have a harder time with the alumni, with the Hall of Famers, than he is with the journalists. Would you agree with that, or do you think it's going to be kind of split?
Yeah, I have to think so. One thing we've been asked not to do is reveal our votes, so I won't do that here. I have no idea how anybody voted, but you've heard the comments that Ryan Sandberg has made in the past about playing the game the right way, and there seemed to be some sort of shots at Sammy there, veiled or subtle shots at Sammy that maybe Ryan telegraphed that he wouldn't vote for him. Billy Williams is on the committee as a Hall of Famer. He was Sammy's first hitting coach with the Cubs. Maybe he goes for Sammy. He always enjoyed working with Sammy. If you remember, after 9/11 and 01, he gave Sammy the American flag and Sammy ran around the bases. Billy kind of choreographed that whole thing. Fergie Jenkins, Lee Smith, and Andre Dawson are the other Cubs Hall of Famers on this committee that I am also a member of. I have no idea how they'll vote. The media members may be more sympathetic. Myself, as you mentioned, David Haugh, Kerry Muscat, Dan Roan, Fred Mitchell, Barry Rosner, Bruce Levine, all of whom had some sort of contact with Sammy one way or the other. So, we'll see how it goes. But I think you might be right on that the Cubs Hall of Famers might be less inclined than the media members to vote Sammy into the Cubs Hall of Fame.
Now, Bruce, in the book, you do have a chapter on Sammy Sosa, and it's interesting because when you brought up the topic of Sammy at your book talk in the library, there was I would say more of an anti-Sammy sentiment, and I was kind of surprised. And I still don't understand just the divisiveness of the Sammy Sosa character, especially considering all the, like I said, Alex Rodriguez on Fox Sports, Big Papi, David Ortiz, everybody loves him. I don't get the Sammy hate, and it just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, throughout his career, Sammy, for one reason or another, has been among the most polarizing figures that I've ever seen. The chapter is a favorite of mine that I wrote. It's the longest chapter in the book. I interviewed more people for that chapter than any other, and I kept learning more. I thought I knew a lot. I didn't know nearly as much as I thought I did. This goes back to the White Sox getting Sammy Sosa from the Rangers. It tore apart the White Sox organization because they traded a popular guy in Harold Baines to the Rangers for Sammy Sosa. Scouts were asked, would you put your job on the line for this Sosa kid? Manager Jeff Torborg was furious with the GM Larry Himes, who later came to the Cubs and got Sammy Sosa for them. And so he was a polarizing figure, Sammy was, from the word go, and it remained so with the Cubs, whether it was how he conducted himself, whether it was because he was flashy, and in the end of the career, the talk about the steroids, and then the exit in 2004 when he left the team early. So that did a lot. And let's not forget the cork bat. That's the one documentable piece of cheating that we have against Sammy. That might have been a misdemeanor in the grand scheme of things, if you want to call steroids a felony. I don't know, but that's the one piece we have against Sammy, if you want to say he cheated. But, this whole business, I was thinking about this today, Crawly, about the exit. Well, there was a guy named Carlos Zambrano who in 2011 walked out on the Cubs after a bad start in Atlanta, packed up his stuff in the clubhouse down at Turner Field and just left. And Carlos has been welcomed back. He sung the seventh inning stretch at least once. When I was on the beat until 2019, you'd see Carlos there on the field in the clubhouse. He's been welcomed back. So I got to believe with Tom Ricketts, it's the steroid thing. But in any case, Sammy, just so polarizing.
Yeah, I actually saw Carlos at the Field of Dreams game in Dyersville, Iowa. He was there with the Cubs. So definitely, like you said, welcome back. Now, obviously, on the other end, there's the beloved Kerry Wood. And this was hard to believe, Bruce, 25 years since the 20 strikeout game. And you have a really interesting chapter on Kerry Wood, the phenom. Now, when you talk about it, I mean, Kerry Wood, when you look at the numbers, you're not looking at a guy. I've had people say he needs his flag retired. And I'm like, you know who's up on those flagpoles. They're some of the greatest to ever play the game. But for Cub fans, Kerry Wood is just something special.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to write that chapter. The word phenom is almost exclusive to baseball. It's one of those romantic type words. But he came along at a time when the Cubs in 1997 went 0-14. The season was over in April. He comes along in 1998, wows everybody at spring training, didn't make the team out of camp, and it wasn't a service time thing like we talk about today. But then he comes up in Montreal, strikes out Mark Grudzielanek, the first batter he faces in the majors. And then you know what happened on May the 6th of 1998, soon to be 26 years, if you can believe that. 20 strikeouts. From then, a phenomenon was born, and every start, whether at home or on the road that year, drew people, drew media. National media were traveling to games. Chicago media were traveling to games on the road just to see this kid pitch. And, if he struck out 13, it was like, oh, he didn't get 20 again. Hey, 13's pretty good. But from then, this whole phenomenon was born, and it never left. And, and that came up in the era when Chicks dig the long ball. That was the same summer as McGuire and Sosa and the great home run race. But I think Kerry had a lot of things. He had that country boy look. He really did love Chicago, and he stayed here, made his home here, does a lot of charitable work, pitched through and overcame a lot of injuries, illnesses. And if you look at his numbers, like strikeouts per 9 innings, some of the best in history. And if you remember the Cubs, he went to Cleveland, went to the Yankees, came back to the Cubs. They made a big deal at the convention with Pat Hughes saying, I've got some breaking news. And then they bring Kerry Wood back, and he didn't last long. He retired in May. But if you remember, he struck out, I believe, Diane Vecchieto or the White Sox, walked off the field. His son came up running towards him, embraced, and the crowd went nuts. So whether his career turned out like he wanted it to or we wanted it to, remained a phenomenon, and to this day, one of the most popular Cubs in history. And I had a good time writing that book and talking to people like his manager, Jim Riggleman, who was accused of overworking him or whatever the case might be.
Now, take me back to May 6, 1998. you're at Wrigley Field, and again, everybody always laughs because the very first pitch he throws, he hits the umpire in the face mask, completely whiffs, has a bad bullpen. At what point among the beat writers were you guys all kind of starting to look each other like something special is going on here?
I think it was around the third or the fourth inning. The umpire you mentioned was Jerry Meals, right in the face. And Kerry told me back in 2018 at the 20th anniversary, he goes, I had nothing in the bullpen that day. He said, let's go out and wing this thing. And all of a sudden you see Biggio, Bagwell, Bell, Alou, and all these great hitters, and they got no clue up there. And I've heard other players tell me he was throwing a wiffle ball up there the way it was breaking with that slurve ball pitch and the almost 100-mile-an-hour fastball. But I think third or fourth inning, and the buzz really began in the press box and around the stands. And if you remember, there were only about 15,000 people in the ballpark that day. It was a dank, drizzly day. People still weren't sold on whether the Cubs would be any good or not. They won the wild card that year, but in May we had no idea. But here comes this fresh-faced kid. The ball is moving like crazy. One hit in the game, a little infield dribbler that Kevin Ory at third base almost got. Maybe some people thought it was an error. And I remember Ricky Gutierrez got the hit. He was with the Cubs a couple of years later. We're in spring training, and they're showing on the TV in the clubhouse the 20 strikeout game. Ricky's got a bat in his hand. He walks by, he goes, I got a hit off of that. Sorry, so-and-so. So anyway, they had a good time with it. But yeah, it was one of those days. And then the Cubs kept making announcements in the press box. This ties this record, this about rookie, and on and on and on. And, you know, by the time you got to the ninth inning, the entire place was crazy. And news outlets were sending people on the fly just to get out there to catch the end of the game.
Now, another story that's kind of broke recently has been Andre Dawson's request to have the Cubs logo on his Hall of Fame cap. And you have a chapter in the book about Andre Dawson. And I mean, it is the most unique story, I think, in all of sports. That's one I don't think we will ever see again.
No, that's a chapter that Jesse wrote and did a really nice job on it, talking with Andre. And if you remember, Andre Dawson signed a blank contract to come with the Cubs in 1987. He was with the Expos, wanted off that very hard artificial turf at Olympic Stadium. There were no takers because the owners were illegally colluding to keep down salaries, which they later paid a heavy price for. So he shows up, and much to, I think, the chagrin of Dallas Green, who was running the Cubs at the time, and says, I'll sign a blank contract. Well, that put Dallas in a very bad spot because here you have this great player is willing to play for almost anything. So they fill in $500,000. Goes on to win the MVP for a last place ball club and becomes one of the most popular players in history. And as you said, goes into the Hall of Fame and as a Montreal Expo. But I think that he had the most fun and enjoyed his most acclaim as a Cub. So I don't blame him. And I'm not surprised that he wants that C on the cap rather than the Expos logo.
It made me laugh because in the book you've mentioned it, and I've talked to Andre about it before, and it's that whole idea of he's there, blank check, and they think they're going to call his bluff, so they basically lowball him. They give him half of what Montreal offered him, and he accepts it, and Dallas Green has to say, hold on, I'll get back to you, because he wasn't expecting Dawson to accept the lowball offer.
No, it was just one of those things that was a perfect storm of what was going on at the time with the collusion, and Dawson had nowhere to go, but he thought the Cubs were the perfect situation. And then he says, okay. And then it's like, oops, what do we do now? And the rest is history. Became one of the most popular Cubs, just a cannon of an arm in right field. And what people don't remember is that his knees were so bad even then that he had to take a lot of treatment before and after games to get ready and to stay ready, and just a remarkable work ethic and an example to other players, younger players who were around the team who would come up in subsequent years.
Now, Bruce, Tom Cooper here says, I know this goes back a while. My favorite photo is Gabby Hartnett talking to Al Capone before a game. Do you have any stories about that?
Yeah, that's funny because I wanted to go back in history with this and talk about Gabby Hartnett for one reason. He hit one of the most important home runs in Major League history, the homer in the Gloman in 1938. It didn't win the pennant for the Cubs, but a couple of days later they clinched, and it's been forgotten to history. You hear about the Fisk home run, and rightfully so. Kirk Gibson and Kirby Puckett and all these big home runs. Bobby Thompson. Well, Hartnett's was just as important, but there's no TV then. There's apparently no film unless some film comes out of somebody's attic one of these days. The radio broadcast has not been preserved. There's just a few photos remaining. So I got with and had a wonderful visit with Gabby Hartnett's granddaughter, who lives in the Chicago area, and Gabby stayed in Chicago all of his life. Now, the photo that you mentioned was actually taken at Comiskey Park during either a City Series game or some other exhibition game between the Cubs and the White Sox. And Gabby signed an autograph, or it might have been Al Capone's son. And the commissioner of baseball, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, didn't want him to be doing that. And then Gabby's like, "Well, you tell him. You tell Al Capone." But Gabby's a great, considered by many the greatest catcher in Cubs history, Wilson Contreras notwithstanding, and Randy Hundley and others. Great player, stayed in Chicago, ran a bowling alley in Lincolnwood for the rest of his life. And to me, it was one of the great miscarriages of justice that he's been forgotten. I just hate that kind of stuff gets swept under the rug or forgotten to history just because it happened a long time ago. But again, another chapter that I went a little bit different with. I was able to, through the Cubs, track down Gabby's granddaughter, gave a wonderful interview, and also told me about, Gabby, the guy who would go out to clinics even in the rain when they didn't think he'd show up, and, work with young ball players on an off day or whatever it might be. So another fun chapter for me.
Now, here's the thing. Here's what made me laugh about that chapter is that his granddaughter would mention that she would wear the Hartnett jersey to Cubs games. And I know what a fan you are of unique jerseys. And so I had to imagine if you ever had seen her at the game, you definitely would have taken a picture of that one.
I certainly would have. And a lot of times when I would see something like that, I would go up to the person and say, "What possesses you to have that?" And it's a game I continue. I freelance for NHL.com doing the Blackhawks, and I walk around the United Center before every game looking for old, like Dennis Hull or somebody like that, Phil Russell, old jerseys. And if it's really unique like that, I'll go up and ask the person, "What are you thinking here?" But yeah, that's one. If I had seen it, no doubt I would have talked with her. Joanne Bebrock is her name, by the way, and asked her about it. And who knows where it would have gone from there. But, I got a million of them.
Now, speaking of good timing, you had the luck of covering the Cubs when they have probably had three of their most colorful managers in modern day history. Obviously, Leo the Lip DeRozier's up there. But when you talk about being able to cover Dusty Baker, Lou Piniella, and Joe Maddon, I think you referred to it as a sports writer's dream.
Yeah, I said you probably thought you died and gone to beat writer heaven if you covered those three guys. And another guy who wasn't, in that category, Jim Riggleman, also a gentleman, loved covering him, interviewed him for the book. So he's in this book. But my gosh, three guys with such big names and pedigree. First of all, you get Dusty Baker in 2003. Joe Cool from California, well-read, music going on in the manager's office, all kinds of theories about everything. And then Lou Piniella, the old player, the old hitter with the Yankees, coming in and, trying to burnish his image and maybe get a Hall of Fame vote with, if he can take the Cubs to the World Series. Well, the guy that finally did it was Joe Maddon. A lot like Dusty, I would say. Joe and Dusty, a lot alike. Both have a lot of varied interests outside of baseball, music, cars, speak on social issues, whatever it was. So I got to cover all three of those guys, and sitting before and after games and just listening to them talk and tell stories is unbelievable. And it was, one of those things, like every day you'd sit there and go, I'm listening to Joe Maddon talk about, some scout with the Angels when he was first coming up, or Gene Mauch telling him, "You do a good job here," and everything. And Lou telling stories about George Steinbrenner and, his expression, "Look here, and what am I going to do with all these left-hand hitters? And what am I going to do with all these right-hand hitters?" And stuff like that. And Dusty, with all the criticism he took after the Bartman game, and all that kind of stuff. So there is so much wrapped up into those three guys that they're just interesting human beings as well as interesting managers who saw a lot of good and some bad and took a lot of criticism, all three of them.
Yeah, and the thing about Dusty for me is just how he went from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows in 2 seasons, Bruce. He has them 5 outs away from the World Series, and by the end of 2004, a lot of Cub fans are ready to run him out of town.
Yeah, it was one of the most falls from grace that I have ever seen. The 03 season, so high. And then, Dusty gets criticized for not taking Pryor out or not talking to Pryor in the Bartman game, his handling of Wood and Pryor and other pitchers. But the one thing about Dusty is that the players love him and loved him then. Kerry Wood, one of the pitchers that Dusty allegedly ruined, said he would go through a wall for Dusty Baker. And when Dusty would come to town, say as manager of the Reds, Kerry Wood would make a beeline over to Dusty, and they would talk for 15 or 20 minutes. When Mark Pryor, another one of those pitchers that Dusty allegedly ruined, was trying to get back into the game after many injuries, Dusty was the manager of the Reds, Mark Pryor called him and said, Dusty, can you get me another shot, even if it's on a minor league deal? So, it was one of those things that it should have turned out better. I wish it had turned out better. Dusty probably could have done more to help that. It was kind of the 04 season was really a miserable one to cover, even though the Cubs won one more game than they did the previous year when they went to the playoffs. It was this us against them. It was battling the broadcasters, whatever it might have been, and it just ended up bad. And you know how they collapsed in that final week with the home run in Shea Stadium, and then they lost all those games to the Mets and the Reds, and things went downhill from there. But could have, should have, then I wish it would have turned out better for him.
I still laugh because you mentioned the LaTroy Hawkins press conference, and I'm sitting, and it's still to this day, I can remember him just like, it was just completely unprompted. He starts going after everybody, and I'm like, what is this guy doing? And I got a couple guesses of who may have said that they could blow a game too, but that just made me laugh out loud.
Yeah, that was in early 04 because Joe Borowski was the closer, and he comes to spring training in 04 hurt. We wrote that he was hurt. He denied it and later told us we were right. So 04 spring training got off to a really bad start that way. The whole Pryor, is it his Achilles? It is his elbow. Well, they make LaTroy the closer after they put Joe Borowski on what they called the DL back then, the disabled list. And he out of the clear blue, LaTroy calls a press conference to say, 1, I'm not going to talk, okay? And then 2, I can do your job, but you can't do mine. So, and like you said, anytime he blew a save, it's like, well, we could have done that too. He left himself wide open. It was not the wisest of moves. I don't know if the Cubs had any inkling that he was going to do that. I think if they did, they would not have let him do that. But he just set himself up for whatever he got. And too bad, because in a lot of ways, LaTroy, an interesting guy, lasted a long time in the big leagues from Gary, Indiana, right down the road. So, yeah, that was one of the most bizarre seasons. And that moment was one of the most bizarre of that season.
Now, I got to tell you, I remember, they fired Dusty and at the end of the 2006 season, and they're looking for a manager. I was a younger man back then, and I was all into Joe Girardi. I wanted Joe Girardi to manage the Cubs. And I had a couple of friends that were in an older age bracket than I was that were all about Lou Piniella. And I felt Lou Piniella, I thought the game had passed him by, but when I read your book, it really seemed like Lou still had stuff in the tank to contribute, to help players, still a very good baseball mind, and still had a lot of the passion.
Well, he really did. And one of the things that I point out in there, Lou had a real good eye for talent. He could have been a scout. He knew who could play and who couldn't. He knew who would play and who wouldn't. He took one look at the roster, gave it a little bit of time. They had Caesar as tourist at shortstop, and he was like, get him out of here. He's the one that put Ryan Theriot at shortstop in 07, and Theriot had 2 very good years. He'd say, son, you're playing shortstop. And behind the plate, he never did take to Michael Barrett. So they trade Barrett after his unfortunate incident with Mr. Zambrano in the dugout, and they end up getting Jason Kendall. And later that year, this kid named Giovanni Soto comes up at the end of September of 07, or in September of 07, becomes Rookie of the Year in 2008. So Lou really did know talent. he also knew things like pitching. He would suggest a pitcher move from one side of the rubber to the other to get a better angle at the plate. And it's like, wow, this is pretty good for an old hitter. Well, I guess so, because he faced a lot of pitchers. But no, he had a lot of fire left in the tank. And I think you saw it in that June Saturday against the Braves when he got himself kicked out of the game and arguing, and the Cubs went on a run from there.
It was Mark Wagner, I think. And so the final manager in your trio is Joe Maddon, who I got to see him at Club 400 this summer. He is by far my favorite Cubs manager. And I go back, not horrible, but I remember Glenn, Jim Fry and Don Zimmer and you mentioned Riggs and Troublehorn and all these guys. But to me, Joe Maddon was just totally just unique in a very interesting spirit. And I still to this day am blown away at how, some Cub fans still believe that they won the World Series in spite of Joe instead of because of Joe.
Yeah, and that's not at all true. Let me tell you, first of all, what he did. He changed the culture of the Cubs when he got there in 2015. He got them to believe they could win. In May of that year, I remember being in St. Louis, and the Cubs weren't sure if they could beat the Cardinals. It took all summer. But by the time the Cardinals came to Chicago in September of 15, they won, and there was a little beanball war. And Joe went after the Cardinals, and I was ready for it with my video camera when I was working with the paper. And Joe just went off about how they might start stuff, but we're going to finish it. And I don't know what book they're playing out of, but it was written 100 years ago. So he changed the culture there to what you saw happen in 16, where the Cubs were a dominant team. Now, so let's talk about that World Series where Joe gets so much criticism. One thing gets forgotten. They were down 3-1. They were left for dead. The Indians were going to win that World Series in 5 games. The beat writers had a little, what I call a seance in Joe's office before every game, where we'd go in and he'd fill us in on some things. It was just a little bit to treat the beat writers, give us a little bit extra. And Joe was the same guy in October when the Cubs were down 3-1 as he was in March in spring training or April or June, whatever it might be. He was relaxed. He never panicked. And that lack of panic filtered down to the Cubs. He didn't panic, and the players didn't panic either. And that's, to me, one of the reasons they were able to come back and win that World Series. Now, that said, you can certainly criticize, and I've done so, his decisions about the pitching in the last couple of games. The Chapman stuff, listen, I had other managers tell me, anytime you get a guy like that, you're going to ride him, and you think about the consequences later. The Cubs weren't going to re-sign Chapman, so it was like, throw him out there. And that's what Joe did. He did the Hendricks thing in Game 7, pulling him early. Okay, yeah, you can argue with that. But on balance, what Joe did was, I think, set a tone, set the culture, and he never panicked. And that's a big reason the Cubs came back to win.
And I think people forget. Like I remember, I'm in a panic, down 3-1. I'm freaking out. Oh my God, is this happening to me all over again? And I'm sitting there, and what ends up happening is I'm seeing he's letting these guys go trick-or-treating with his kids. He's letting them play Mario Kart. It's like he just let it just ride and relax. And I don't think any other Cubs manager just kept the blood pressure, just like you said, steady as they go. And I've heard Joe talk before about, he says, I don't regret anything about Game 7. He says, I regret Game 6. I didn't have someone warming up when we took a bigger lead. And so it took him a while to get Strop in. And when Chapman kind of came in, and he gets upset about that. I think that, to me, more than anything, I think that, he was concerned in Game 7 about burning out Lester in the bullpen. And he was just like, okay, it didn't, there's a bad ball 4 call and a lefty was coming up. So he brings him in. And, again, I think, what did he call it? Outcome bias, right? If Lester gets that out, then they don't even argue about that. No one says anything. To me, I always figured that the first Cub manager that led the Cubs to a World Series would get a statue. And instead, you got people still critical. I'll never get that as long as I live, Bruce. But, I'm looking at part 3 of the book at the trades. And the very first trade you bring up is one that a lot of Cub fans know the history of, Brock for Bruglio. And that is one that, even if you didn't live, I know it, and I didn't live in the 1960s. Why do you think that one just seems, out of all of them, to hit as hard as, and is it because it was a Cardinals trade? I mean, it was just so bizarre.
No, I think it was because they traded a guy who they didn't know what they had, and he went on to become a Hall of Famer, played in 3 World Series with the Cardinals, the hated Cardinals, and won 2 of them. If you have to look back at what was going on with the Cubs at that time. It was kind of total chaos. They didn't have a manager, if you can believe that. They had a system called the College of Coaches, and they even at one point had an athletic director like it was a college. So they would rotate coaches up and down through the Cubs system, and one guy would be the head coach. In 1964, the head coach was Bob Kennedy when they traded him. And they had guys like Lou Klein and V.D. Himsel and all these other guys, Charlie Metro, who were the head coach. They weren't the manager. So you have a kid like Brock, young, impressionable kid. Do we want you to be a base stealer? Do we want you to be a home run hitter? He did have power, hit a home run to center field on the Polo Grounds almost 500 feet away. That's in the book. That starts the chapter. Are you a left fielder? Are you a right fielder? Because of that crazy cockamamie system that they had, College of Coaches, I don't think Brock knew which end was up half the time. So in 63, they contended a little bit. They finished above 500 for the first time in forever. They thought they could win in 64, be a contender at least. They needed some starting pitching. They had guys like Dick Ellsworth and Larry Jackson and Bob Buell, some of whom were past their prime. So down in St. Louis, there was an 18-game winner named Ernie Broglio. Well, the Cubs thought if they get him, they could get over the hump with their pitching staff and win. So they traded Brock to the Cardinals for that. The trade did not go over well in St. Louis. They thought, who would ever trade Broglio for Brock? And I put in my book, well, who indeed? The press in Chicago said, we'll do business with you anytime. Oh, you beautiful Redbirds. Thank you. All that kind of stuff. Well, a couple things happened. The manager in St. Louis, Johnny Keane, told Lou Brock, be yourself. We're going to give you the green light to run. You don't have to worry about any of this other stuff. We're going to bat you up high. Run. You have the green light to run. He never had that in Chicago. So the guy they get back in the trade, Ernie Broglio, has a bum elbow. That was in the days, you remember now this is 60 years ago, where teams weren't trading medical information all the time. That trade would never go down today because the Cubs would know beforehand that he was damaged goods because of the trading off of medical information. That wasn't routine in those days. Look, he only pitched a handful of games that year and a few more in 65 and was done, a couple of years later. So your original question, why is that stuck in so many people's craw? Well, because it was avoidable probably. Had they had a better system of dealing with young players and had, Brock been fully, cognizant of what his role was going to be. What should I do? Okay, I'm a base stealer. I'm this, I'm that, rather than every day it's a new thing, what he's supposed to be. So I think it goes to all those things, trading away a potential Hall of Famer just because the organization was run so poorly in those days.
And the thing about the College of Coaches that still gets me angry is they never gave Buck O'Neil a shot at coaching, which obviously we're in a different time now, but when you think about Buck O'Neil and the intelligence that he had and the managerial prowess that he had, shame that he didn't get to become the first African-American manager when he was right there. But you also talk about some of the positive trades. And when you think about it, the Cubs should really be thanking Philadelphia, because I think 2 of the biggest trades that went the Cubs' way was for getting Fergie Jenkins, probably the greatest pitcher in Cubs history, and Ryan Sandberg, who has his statue coming out this season. So, some good trades as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. And we talk about those. The Fergie one was interesting because I mentioned a couple of the pitchers, Larry Jackson and Bob Buell, the Cubs sent to the Phillies in 66. And they were over the hill pretty much. And they got this guy Jenkins, who was a bullpen guy at the time, and a center fielder named Adolfo Phillips, who would figure into Cubs lore a little bit, and a first baseman named John Hernstein, who didn't really play that much. But Fergie caught the eye of Leo DeRocher in 66, changed him from a reliever to a starter, and the rest, of course, is history. The Phillies made a big mistake with that, as they did with trading Ryan Sandberg in late 81 to the Cubs in the Manny Trio, Ivan DeHazer's trade. Larry Bowa came over, and the joke is, and it's not really an accurate one, was that Sandberg was a throw-in. Well, the only reason people think he was a throw-in or thought that back then is because nobody had ever heard of him. He had played at Wrigley Field in September of 81 with the Phillies, got his first hit there, And Larry Boa made that happen. He called him the throw-in in spring training. They got me. You're just the throw-in. So Sandberg, if you remember, had a rough start at the plate. He was a third baseman at the time. And the Cubs, one of the good things that manager Jim Fry did was that they moved him to second base. And Fry, who was a better hitting coach than he was a manager, got Sandberg to pull the ball more and thus become a power hitter rather than a singles and doubles gap hitter. So a lot of things happened then. It was a big break for Ryan. And let's give Dallas Green some credit too, because if you remember, Dallas Green managed the Phillies to the World Series title in 1980. So he knew the system. And Dallas was a system guy, a farm system guy. He knew everything about the Phillies system, and he was smart enough and had the foresight enough to pluck Sandberg out of that system and turn him into a Hall of Famer with the Cubs.
I got to tell you, Bruce, I think, I know Brockford Bruglia is a big one, but for me, firing Dallas Green was one of the biggest mistakes, in my opinion, in Cubs history. And I'm just sad that he's no longer with us to celebrate this 40th anniversary, because he changed the entire culture. And I think of the guys that came out of the farm system and the guys that he traded for. And I just wonder what would have happened if he would have stuck around a few years longer.
Yeah, that's one of the great mysteries and one of the great sad things in Cubs history. I think Dallas's line was that the people at the Tribune Company learned the lingo of baseball, as he put it, thought they knew everything, and they didn't need him. They didn't like him because he was brash and he was big and he had a loud mouth and he fought with the neighbors and really set the stage for the Cubs getting lights in Wrigley Field, something he probably should get more credit for. But if you look at the system, guys like Greg Maddux and Palmeiro and Grace and Joe Girardi and Jamie Moyer, it's the great unknown. What would have happened if Dallas had stayed around? Would he have beaten Theo Epstein to a World Series title for the Cubs? Theo is the guy who got it done, but would Dallas have got it done? We'll never know. But between rebuilding the system, refurbishing Wrigley Field, and getting lights in there, were his legacy. And yeah, you're right. It's too bad that he wasn't around to see it through.
Now, you mentioned the lights, and that I know is a very passionate subject for you, and you have a chapter about it in the book, about the lights and the mythology behind the lights. If people aren't aware, Wrigley actually had lights. What was it, 1941? They were all ready to install lights. Pearl Harbor happens and they donate them to the war effort, and that's it. No lights from 41, and now we're in the 80s. And people are confused as to why the Cubs actually did get lights, and you talk about that in the book.
Right. I mean, the Wrigley family, Philip K. Wrigley, after the war, really had no interest really in the day-to-day operations of the team or putting a winner on the field. And the idea of night baseball was something that he completely lost interest in. Well, the world changed, and with World Series games going to nighttime TV, prime time, you look what happened to the Cubs in '69 from playing all those day games. I got to believe that they were worn out from that. So it was time for lights at Wrigley Field. Well, they didn't get them until 1988, but they did make the playoffs in 1984. And this myth, and it's the biggest myth, I'm convinced, in the history of Chicago sports, that the Cubs somehow lost home field advantage in the '84 NLCS because Wrigley Field didn't have lights. It's simply not true. What would have happened is they would have lost home field advantage in the World Series and gotten the 3-day games over the weekend instead of games 1 and 2 and 6 and 7 at home. They would have played the middle 3 games of the World Series at home, but they did not lose home field to the Padres. Back then, it was an alternating 2-3 site, 2 at home, 3 on the road. And that year, the NL East was going to get 2 at home, and the NL West, being the Padres, will get 3 at home. That did not change. But for some reason, this myth has persisted that the Cubs were cheated out of a game. And people like Dallas Green and Rick Sutcliffe and others around that team seem to have forgotten that. And they went on and promulgated this myth. But, looking through all the history of it, and in the book, I cite columnists like the estimable Tom Boswell, who wrote that, no, this is not going to happen. Things will progress in the National League as they are scheduled. The only change will come in the World Series. And in a way, I wish that would have taken place, because the Cubs and Tigers would have, I think, been just a compelling World Series, rematch of '45 and others. And two old charter franchises of their league, two great ballparks, Tiger Stadium and Wrigley Field. But the point is that never happened that way. And I correct people on that to this day. I see it online always when you hear about the Cubs in '84. It's like, oh, no, here it comes again. They're going to say the Cubs lost the home field. They didn't. Read the chapter in the book. It's all detailed in there. And, they got lights in '88 and everybody lived happily ever after.
Now, Bruce, I mean, the book, there's just so much in there, and definitely pick it up. But I thought it was interesting that the foreword was written by David Ross. We all know David Ross was let go at the end of the season in a very shocking move. What was your relationship like with David Ross, and how shocked were you when he was let go?
Yeah, my relationship, like all the other writers, I think was very good. And I think that's the reason, and all credit to Jesse and talking to David about writing the foreword. Jesse got that done, and all credit to him. But I remember after the 15th season, we're leaving the ballpark. Remember, they got swept by the Mets. And nobody, people were disappointed, but it was like better things are coming. You just knew it. So the next day we come in after they lost, and Theo does his postmortem, and I'm walking to my car in the parking lot, and I see a car come up and a guy roll down his window honking the horn, and it's David Ross, and he's waving at me, and he goes, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for all the coverage. Thank you for the interviews. And I'm like, no. He goes, no, I mean it. Thank you. So David was really a joy to deal with as a player. You knew he was a leader. You knew his relationship with John Lester, and that's partly why they brought him here. But was I shocked that he got fired as manager? I suppose, but I learned in doing this all these years, you're never totally shocked because anything can happen. I guess the Cubs saw that they could pounce on an upgrade in a manager in Craig Counsell. We'll see if that comes true. So I was surprised, but I've learned not to be totally shocked by these things.
Well, Bruce, what I'm going to do right now, I'm dropping the link to your book in the chat. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it anywhere that you get books, even Barnes and Nobles, wherever. And I got to tell you, Bruce, it is truly an enjoyable read because you're not stuck in one specific, the 69 or it's kind of all over the place. So it has a little something for everybody, from, Gabby Hartnett all the way to Jake Arrieta. You guys cover a little bit of everything. And I think that's part of what makes it enjoyable is that, my teenager could read it. My dad could read it. I could read it. There's something for everybody. And it's just such a well-written book. Are you going to be doing any more book talks in the upcoming future?
Well, I hope so. We did the Schaumburg Library in December. I've been in talks with in your hometown with Bartlett and maybe getting something done in April. And I'll manage to try to schedule that when the Cubs are away so nobody has to miss a Cubs home game, especially you. And so maybe we'll do that in the spring and April at the Bartlett Public Library. But we'll see if others call. I'm always open to it, as I'm sure Jesse is.
Bruce, let the listeners know where they can find you on the socials.
Okay, I'm on Facebook, just my name, Bruce Miles, and on Twitter, Bruce Miles 2112. I'm a Rush fan, so Rush fans will know that one. And one of the things that I'm most proud of was a beat writer was that I always engaged with the readers and the fans. I wrote for them. I didn't write for my editors. I didn't write to impress other writers. I wrote for the reader, the Cubs fan, to keep them informed, entertained, all that kind of stuff. So if you engage me on social media, good chance I'll write you back.
Appreciate you joining us, Bruce. The book is called The Franchise Chicago Cubs, A Curated History of the Northsiders. I would have played some Rush for you, but I would have gotten a YouTube violation, so I apologize. But Bruce, thanks so much for jumping on, and hopefully talk to you again in the future.
Okay, Crawly, I had a blast.
You are listening to Episode 2, Season 3 of the Fly the W670 podcast. Bruce Miles talking the franchise, the Chicago Cubs. Crawly, great job with that one. Hope something happens soon so we can have maybe an emergency podcast.
Absolutely. We need an emergency podcast. The countdown to CubsCon begins. And don't forget to get that book by Bruce Miles, The Franchise. It is really a fun read, and I think Cub fans all over will enjoy it.
Well, that's a wrap. Don't forget to listen, download, review, and subscribe to the Fly the W podcast. Follow us on the socials, Facebook, Instagram. Of course, we're on Twitter, and flythew670@gmail.com is where you can email Crawly and I. And you can watch us, that's right, on the YouTube by subscribing to the 670 The Score YouTube channel.
CubsCon, here we come. Go Cubs! Hey guys, it's Crawly. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below. Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Links are in the description. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Go Cubs!